The city was draped in a blanket of fresh snow, each flake a tiny, glittering jewel under the cold glow of Christmas Eve lights. For Sarah, a single mother navigating the bustling sidewalk with her son Leo's small hand in hers, the festive cheer felt distant, almost like a scene from someone else's life. The biting wind whipped at her thin coat, a constant reminder of the bills waiting on her kitchen table and the modest presents hidden in her closet. Her mind was a frantic calculator, tallying every cent, stretching a meager budget to its breaking point to create a sliver of magic for her boy. She quickened her pace, her thoughts consumed by the pressure to get home, to wrap the few gifts she could afford, and to pretend that everything was perfectly fine, even for just one night. Leo, however, saw only wonder. His eyes, wide with the unfiltered joy of childhood, darted from the shimmering angels in a store window to the synchronized blinking lights on a massive fir tree in the town square. He could hear the faint sound of carolers somewhere down the street, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope through the chilly air. For him, this was a world of pure enchantment, a magical kingdom where anything was possible. Sarah watched him, a bittersweet ache in her chest. She wanted to give him that world, a world without worry or lack. But the single, worn $20 bill in her pocket was a stark reminder of their reality. It was their last bit of cash until her next paycheck, earmarked for groceries to last them through the holiday. As they turned a corner, away from the main thoroughfare, the festive noise faded slightly, replaced by the quiet hum of the city at rest. It was there, huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed shop, that they saw him. An elderly man, his shoulders slumped under the weight of more than just the cold, sat on a small wooden stool. A simple, hand-painted sign read, "Homemade bread," and before him, on a small folding table, were a few remaining loaves, their golden crusts looking warm and inviting, despite the freezing temperatures. He wasn't calling out to passers-by. He simply sat in silence, a profound and quiet sorrow etched into the lines of his face, making him almost invisible to the hurried people rushing home. Leo stopped abruptly, his small tug on Sarah's coat, pulling her out of her anxious thoughts. He pointed with a mitten-clad finger, his voice clear and innocent in the frosty air. "Mommy?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the old man. "Why is he selling bread on Christmas Eve? Shouldn't he be home with his family?" The question was simple, yet it struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. It sliced through her own self-pity and financial stress, forcing her to truly see the man in the doorway. He wasn't just a part of the city's backdrop. He was a person, alone and working on a night meant for warmth, family, and celebration. The child's question hung between them, a pure, unwavering beacon of empathy. A battle raged within Sarah's heart. Every practical instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to protect that last $20 bill, as if it were life itself. It was the sensible thing to do, the responsible choice for her and her son. But as she looked from Leo's curious, compassionate face to the old man's tired, lonely eyes, another feeling began to surface, a powerful, undeniable wave of empathy that quieted all her fears. She felt an inexplicable pull toward this stranger, a sense that this was no ordinary encounter. She did not know it then, but her response to this simple question would set in motion a chain of events that would redefine the meaning of Christmas for them all. The weight of her son's question settled upon Sarah with an almost physical pressure, silencing the frantic calculations in her mind. The $20 bill in her pocket felt simultaneously like a shield and a burden. It was their food for the holiday, the thin line between a sparse Christmas dinner and an empty table. Every rational part of her brain urged her to pull Leo along, to offer a simple, dismissive answer and retreat into the relative safety of their small apartment. Yet she couldn't move. Her gaze drifted from Leo's innocent, questioning eyes to the lonely figure of the old man, a solitary island in a sea of hurried passers-by. The festive lights of the city blurred, and the world narrowed to this single, pivotal moment. A crossroad where practicality and compassion collided with breathtaking force. With a soft exhale that turned into a cloud of white in the frigid air, Sarah made her choice. It wasn't a decision born of logic, but of a deeper, more profound instinct. She gently squeezed Leo's hand and began to walk toward the recessed doorway, each step feeling deliberate and significant. The crunch of snow under her worn boots was the only sound that registered, a steady rhythm marking her advance against the screaming chorus of her own financial anxieties. She imagined the meager contents of her refrigerator, the challenge of stretching what little she had even further. The sacrifice was real, a tangible loss she would feel in the coming days, but turning away felt like a far greater poverty, a poverty of the spirit she refused to accept. As they drew closer, the man's quiet sorrow became more defined. She could see the fine web of wrinkles around his eyes, each one a testament to a long life lived. His hands, resting on his lap, were chapped and red, trembling slightly not just from the cold, but perhaps from a weariness that went bone deep. He hadn't looked up, seemingly resigned to his invisibility, his gaze fixed on the snow-dusted pavement. The loaves of bread, arranged so carefully on the small table, looked like humble offerings left at an altar of forgotten hope. It was in his stillness, in his quiet dignity amidst the biting wind, that Sarah saw not a stranger, but a reflection of a universal human ache for connection and warmth on a cold winter's night. She knelt down, bringing herself to Leo's level, her face close to his. "You know, sweetie," she whispered, her voice a warm current in the frosty air. "Sometimes the most important Christmas gifts don't come in shiny paper. Sometimes the best gift is just showing someone they're not alone." She looked into her son's eyes, wanting him to understand the meaning of this moment, to plant a seed of empathy that would grow with him long after this night. She was teaching him a lesson that she herself was only just fully embracing. The cold of the pavement seeped through her jeans, a stark reminder of their reality. But a different kind of warmth was spreading through her chest, a quiet resolve that felt more valuable than any amount of money. Standing up, Sarah faced the old man, who finally lifted his head, his eyes widening with a faint glint of surprise. A gentle, genuine smile touched her lips as she looked at the few remaining loaves. "They look delicious," she said, her voice clear and kind. "We'll take all of them." Without a moment's hesitation, she reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the worn $20 bill. She pulled it out and placed it on the table, the small piece of paper a silent testament to her choice. The act was simple, yet it felt monumental. A quiet ripple sent out into the vast, indifferent city, carrying a weight of kindness that she couldn't yet comprehend. The old man, whose name they learned was Arthur, simply stared at the $20 bill resting on his table, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For a long moment, he was silent, the bustling sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. He finally looked up, not at Sarah, but at Leo, and a fragile, deeply pained smile touched his lips. He shook his head slowly, as if to clear a fog of disbelief. "Please," he said, his voice raspy with cold and emotion, "you can't just, you must let me thank you properly. My apartment is just around the corner. It's too cold for this little one to be out. Allow me to offer you both a cup of hot cocoa. It's the least I can do." Sarah hesitated, a flicker of caution wrestling with the undeniable sincerity in his gaze. But looking at Leo, whose nose was red from the chill, she found herself nodding. Arthur's apartment was small and impeccably clean, filled with the lingering heavenly scent of baked bread and cinnamon. It was a space that felt lived in, a sanctuary of memories. Framed photographs adorned every surface, nearly all of them featuring a woman with a radiant smile and kind, sparkling eyes. Leo, immediately comfortable, pointed to a picture on the mantelpiece of the woman standing beside a grand, beautifully decorated Christmas tree. "She's pretty," he announced with the simple honesty of a child. Arthur's gentle smile returned, this time with a little more strength. "Yes, she was," he replied softly, his gaze lingering on the photograph with a mixture of love and profound loss. "That was my Mary. She made every day feel like Christmas." He busied himself in the small kitchen, his movements slow but deliberate, a man finding solace in a familiar routine. As he prepared the hot cocoa, pouring steaming milk into 2 cheerful snowman mugs for Sarah and Leo, the atmosphere in the tiny apartment became a cocoon of warmth against the winter's bite. Arthur didn't speak of poverty or hardship. Instead, he spoke of Mary. He shared small, tender anecdotes, how she would always hum carols off-key while she baked, how she believed that kindness was a currency that never lost its value. Sarah listened, captivated, seeing not just a man in need, but a heart grieving a monumental loss. She understood that his presence on the street corner was about more than money. It was a ritual, a way to keep a part of his beloved wife alive. Leo, sipping his cocoa contentedly, seemed to understand on an instinctual level, offering Arthur a quiet, comforting presence. While Arthur recounted a story about Mary winning a local baking contest, Sarah's eyes wandered around the room, and a quiet puzzle began to form in her mind. Though the furniture was modest, she noticed a beautiful, handcrafted wooden music box on a side table and a collection of old, leather-bound books that seemed far too elegant for their surroundings. In the main photograph on the wall, Mary was wearing a simple string of pearls that looked genuinely lustrous, even in the aged picture. Nothing quite added up. These were not the possessions of a man forced to sell bread on a street corner for survival. There was a story here, a history hidden beneath the surface of his quiet sorrow, and Sarah felt an inexplicable sense that his connection to the bread and to Mary was far more complex than she could possibly imagine. As they prepared to leave, bundled back up in their coats, Arthur pressed the loaves of bread into Sarah's arms, refusing to take no for an answer. Then he knelt before Leo and gently placed a small, intricately carved wooden robin in the boy's mitten. "Mary loved robins," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said they were messengers of hope." He stood and looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a gratitude so immense it was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," he whispered, his gaze piercing. "You didn't just buy my bread. You answered a prayer I was too afraid to speak aloud." The weight of his words hung in the air, a profound and mysterious statement that left Sarah with a swirling mix of warmth, confusion, and the distinct feeling that this Christmas Eve was far from over. Walking back through the softly falling snow, the warmth of Arthur's apartment still clinging to them, Sarah felt a profound shift within her. The city lights seemed softer, the carols more meaningful. She held the loaves of bread, their comforting weight a tangible reminder of the choice she had made. Leo, clutching the small wooden robin, was chattering excitedly about the hot cocoa and the kind old man. Yet, beneath Sarah's own sense of peace, a quiet current of confusion swirled. The paradox of Arthur's life, the modest apartment filled with small but undeniable traces of a different, more elegant past, and his final, cryptic words about an answered prayer, played over and over in her mind. It was as if she had stepped through a doorway into a story that was still being written, and her small act of kindness was not an ending, but a new and unexpected chapter. Back in his silent apartment, Arthur closed the door, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden emptiness. The brief, warm light that Sarah and Leo had brought with them seemed to linger for a moment before dissolving back into the quiet solitude of his grief. He walked to the mantelpiece, his movements heavy with the weariness of memory, and picked up the framed photograph of his wife, Mary. He sank into his worn armchair, the picture held gently in his trembling hands. The $20 bill Sarah had left lay on the table, a stark, green beacon of unexpected grace. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at Mary's smile, and as he did, the dam of his composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the weathered lines of his cheek, carrying with it the weight of a secret sorrow, a story far deeper than simple poverty. The narrator's voice would tell of a Christmas Eve many years ago, not in this small, quiet apartment, but in a large, vibrant home filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Arthur, full of life, stood beside Mary as they watched their young daughter, Lily, her eyes bright with feverish excitement, carefully place a handmade star atop their magnificent tree. Lily was their whole world, a fragile, beautiful light they fought desperately to protect from the illness that shadowed her days. Mary's bread was not a product then, but a ritual of hope, a warm, fragrant prayer baked into every loaf. She believed that as long as their home was filled with its scent on Christmas Eve, magic was possible, and that their love could weave a miracle strong enough to heal their little girl and keep her safe in their arms. But the miracle they prayed for never arrived. The memory was seared into Arthur's soul. The sterile white walls of the children's hospital, the relentless, rhythmic beeping of machines that slowly faded into silence, and the shattering stillness that followed. They lost their Lily just after the new year. In the crushing aftermath, Mary, instead of surrendering to her grief, transformed it. She began baking her bread every Christmas Eve, standing on a cold street corner just like this one, selling each loaf to raise money for the very hospital where their daughter had spent her final days. It was her defiant legacy, a quiet rebellion against fate, ensuring that Lily's light would continue to bring warmth and hope to other children, even if it could no longer shine for them. It was a promise she kept until her own last breath. Now, in the present, Arthur held the photo to his chest, the past and present blurring into one painful, poignant moment. After Mary had passed away the year before, the tradition had felt like an impossible burden. He had tried, but his heart wasn't in it, his hands clumsy with grief. The few loaves he sold tonight were a testament to his own fading hope. He had gone out into the cold, expecting nothing, simply fulfilling a duty to her memory, whispering a prayer for a sign that her love had not been forgotten. Sarah and her son were that sign, a flicker of light in his immense darkness. But what Arthur didn't know was that the story of that bread, carried by a single mother with a compassionate heart, was about to find its way back to the very place where all his hope and sorrow began. The following morning, the world outside was a pristine canvas of white, the city silenced by the heavy blanket of Christmas snow. Inside their small apartment, a different kind of magic was unfolding. The air was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of Arthur's bread, which Sarah was toasting for a special Christmas breakfast. Leo sat at the small kitchen table, carefully arranging the wooden robin next to his plate, his face aglow with a quiet joy that was more precious to Sarah than any expensive gift. For the first time in a long while, the gnawing anxiety in her chest had subsided, replaced by a gentle, resonant peace. The encounter with Arthur had shifted something within her, a reminder that even in their scarcity, they possessed a wealth of kindness to share. She felt a deep, unexplainable connection to the old man, a sense that their paths had crossed for a reason she was yet to understand. As she reached into the paper bag for the final loaf, her fingers brushed against something stiff and flat, tucked into the folds. Puzzled, she pulled it out. It was a simple, cream-colored envelope, sealed and unmarked except for the elegant, slightly shaky handwriting on the front. It wasn't addressed to her. Instead, it read, "For the Lily Anderson Memorial Fund, City Children's Hope Hospital." Sarah stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. City Children's Hope Hospital. The name was a thunderclap in the quiet room, a sudden and violent intrusion of the past into their peaceful morning. It was a name etched into her very soul, the place where she had spent countless sleepless nights in a hard plastic chair, praying with every fibre of her being as Leo fought for his life just a year ago. The scent of bread was suddenly replaced by the phantom smell of antiseptic and fear. Her hands began to tremble as the memories washed over her in a dizzying, overwhelming flood. She remembered the hushed, sterile corridors, the rhythmic beeping of machines that had become the soundtrack to her nightmares, and the faces of the doctors and nurses who had become their lifeline. Most vividly, she recalled the crushing weight of the medical bills, a mountain of debt that seemed insurmountable. They had been saved by a miracle, a social worker had told them, explaining that an anonymous donation to a special memorial fund had covered the cost of Leo's experimental, life-saving treatment. They had been given a second chance, a gift of such magnitude that she could never hope to repay it, a gift from a faceless benefactor whose generosity had felt like an act of divine intervention in her darkest hour. With a dawning horror and a sense of profound, earth-shattering revelation, Sarah looked back at the envelope. The Lily Anderson Memorial Fund. Anderson. Arthur's last name, she realized with a jolt, was Anderson. Lily must have been his daughter, the child they had lost. The tradition started by his wife, Mary, the lonely vigil on the street corner, the loaves of bread baked with love and sorrow. It wasn't just a tribute, it was the source, the money he collected. Every single dollar earned from his humble offering went directly into the fund that had saved her son. Her $20 bill, the last of her money given out of a simple, empathetic impulse, was a tiny drop of water returning to the very ocean of grace from which she had unknowingly drawn her son's life. The world seemed to spin and then stop, a deafening silence descending upon the small apartment. Sarah sank onto a chair, the envelope clutched in her white-knuckled hand, the toasted bread growing cold on the plate. The kind, lonely man selling bread in the cold was not a stranger she had helped. He was the quiet, unassuming angel who had answered her most desperate prayers without ever knowing her name. Her act of kindness was not a simple gift. It was the universe closing a sacred circle, a debt of immeasurable love being acknowledged across a chasm of grief and anonymity. She looked at Leo, so full of life as he made the wooden robin fly over his plate, and a single hot tear escaped her eye. He was alive. He was here because of the enduring love of two parents for a daughter they had lost, and her entire world had just been turned completely, irrevocably upside down. An icy wave of shame washed over Sarah, so cold and sharp it stole her breath. The warmth of her compassionate act curdled into a bitter, burning humiliation. She saw herself kneeling on that snowy sidewalk, offering her last few dollars with a sense of noble sacrifice to a man she perceived as less fortunate. The memory, once a source of quiet pride, now felt like a scene of profound foolishness. He wasn't just a grieving widower, he was her family's silent guardian angel, the architect of her son's future. Her small, heartfelt gesture now seemed laughably insignificant, an offering of a single drop of water to the very man who had given her an entire ocean. The bread on the table, once a symbol of connection, now felt like a testament to her naivety, a reminder of the vast, secret chasm that had separated them from the very beginning. She looked at Leo, who was still happily playing with the wooden robin, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered his mother's world. How could she possibly explain this to him? How could she articulate that the kind old man wasn't just a new friend, but the anonymous force who had saved his life? The words caught in her throat, tangled in a complex knot of immense gratitude and an equally immense sense of inadequacy. The robin, a simple, carved piece of wood, now felt impossibly heavy, a symbol not of hope, but of an unpayable debt that would follow them for the rest of their lives. A cold silence descended upon the room, replacing the festive morning cheer. Leo looked up, his bright eyes clouded with concern as he sensed the sudden, chilling shift in his mother's demeanor. The joy of Christmas morning had vanished, replaced by a tension he could not comprehend. Sarah's mind began to race, replaying every detail of their encounter with a new, painful clarity. Arthur's gentle eyes, his overwhelming gratitude. Had he known who she was all along? Was it possible he recognized her from the hospital, from those desperate days she spent pacing the corridors? The thought, irrational and unfair, took root in her mind, poisoning the pure memory of their meeting. A surge of misplaced anger rose within her, a defensive shield against her own feelings of being so small, so utterly powerless in the grand narrative of her own life. She felt as though she had been an unwitting participant in a cosmic test, her small act of kindness observed and judged from a position of secret knowledge. She felt exposed and foolish, her genuine empathy now feeling like a naive performance for an audience of one. Overwhelmed by this disorienting cocktail of emotions, Sarah made a silent, swift decision born of wounded pride. She could not face him. The thought of knocking on his door, of looking into his kind, knowing eyes, was unbearable. What could she possibly say? How could she express a gratitude that was so profound it felt like a surrender? Thanking him would be an admission of her own helplessness, a confirmation of the vast imbalance of power she had just discovered. It felt easier to retreat, to hide from the sheer magnitude of his generosity than to confront it. In a sudden, decisive movement, she gathered the loaves of bread, their comforting scent now almost suffocating, and shoved the bag deep into a kitchen cupboard, closing the door as if she could shut away the overwhelming truth along with it. Later that afternoon, as the Christmas lights outside began to glow against the deepening twilight, Leo padded over to her, his face full of innocent hope. "Mommy," he asked, his voice soft, "can we go visit Mr. Arthur? I want to say thank you again for my Robin." The simple question landed with the force of a physical blow, striking the very core of her internal conflict. Sarah froze, her back to him, staring out at the falling snow. She couldn't bring herself to turn around, to let him see the turmoil in her eyes. The path forward was split in two. One way led back to Arthur, to humility and an acceptance of a grace she felt she didn't deserve. The other led inward, into a lonely fortress of pride, severing a connection that had felt like destiny. Her silence was her only answer, a heavy, uncertain pause that left the fate of their Christmas miracle hanging precariously in the balance. The heavy silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick with Leo's unspoken disappointment and Sarah's internal storm. She watched her son's small shoulders slump, his gaze falling to the wooden robin held tightly in his hand. In that simple, heartbreaking image, the fortress of her pride began to crumble. She saw not just a child's fleeting sadness, but the reflection of the profound gift she was carelessly rejecting. The memory of Leo in a hospital bed, pale and small, flashed through her mind with searing clarity. What was her foolish pride compared to the miracle of his laughter filling this small apartment? The life she was so fiercely protecting had been a gift from the very man she was now hiding from. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound that finally broke the spell of her shame. And she turned to face her son, her own eyes now mirroring his unshed tears. Kneeling before Leo, she gently took his small hands in hers, her touch a silent apology. "You're right, sweetie. You are absolutely right," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We have to go see him." She had to make him understand, to bridge the gap her fear had created. "Mr. Arthur, he's a very special kind of angel. A long time ago, his little girl, Lily, got very sick. And ever since then, he and his wife have been helping other sick children, like you." She took a deep, shaky breath, the truth finally finding its voice. "The money from his bread, it helped the doctors make you strong again. I wasn't being fair. I was just overwhelmed because his gift was the biggest gift in the world, and I didn't know how to say thank you. With a renewed sense of purpose, they bundled up once more, preparing to step back out into the Christmas twilight. This time, however, the journey felt entirely different. It was no longer a retreat into their own small world, but a pilgrimage toward a profound connection. Sarah carefully placed the envelope in her coat pocket and took one of the loaves of bread, its simple weight now feeling like a sacred offering. As they walked, the snow fell in gentle, silent flakes, each one seeming to cleanse the air of her earlier turmoil. The city lights sparkled with a renewed magic, no longer a reminder of what she lacked, but a reflection of the incredible grace that had found them. She held Leo's hand, his small, trusting grip a constant reminder of the reason for this journey: to honor a gift by receiving it with an open and humble heart. When she knocked on Arthur's door, her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and hope. He opened it slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to a deep, compassionate understanding as he saw the raw emotion on her face. Before he could speak, the words spilled out of Sarah in a torrent of relieved honesty. "I'm so sorry," she began, holding out the loaf of bread like a peace offering. "I found the envelope. The Lily Anderson Memorial Fund. My son, Leo. He was at Children's Hope last year. We didn't know." The last of her defenses washed away, leaving only pure, unadulterated gratitude. "Your wife, what you do, you saved him. You gave me back my entire world, and all I did was buy your bread." Arthur simply listened, his own eyes welling with tears. He didn't offer platitudes or dismiss her overwhelming gratitude. Instead, he opened his arms, enveloping both Sarah and Leo in a hug that was filled with a shared history of loss, hope, and miraculous connection. He pulled back and knelt before Leo, his gaze full of a light Sarah hadn't seen before. "Mary always believed her bread carried prayers into the world," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "She prayed it would always find who needed it most." He looked from a healthy, vibrant Leo to a tearful but smiling Sarah. "Seeing you here right now, this is her prayer being answered. This is the greatest Christmas gift she could have ever imagined." The small, warm apartment became a sanctuary, not of sorrow, but of a love that had finally, beautifully, come full circle. From that day forward, the small, quiet apartment that had once been a shrine to a painful past became a haven of newfound joy. Arthur, Sarah, and Leo formed an unlikely but beautiful constellation, a family forged not by blood, but by a shared miracle on a snowy Christmas Eve. Their weekly routine now included Sunday dinners where the scent of Mary's bread would fill the air, not as a somber memorial, but as a celebration of life and connection. Arthur's gentle laughter, a sound he thought was lost to him forever, now echoed through the rooms as he taught Leo how to carve small wooden animals. Sarah, watching them, felt a peace that settled deeper than any financial security could. The constant, frantic calculation in her mind had been replaced by a steady, quiet rhythm of gratitude, a profound understanding that her life was richer than she had ever dared to imagine. The universe, it seems, often works in threads we cannot see, weaving a tapestry whose pattern is only revealed in hindsight. For it is true that sometimes the greatest blessings are disguised as our most difficult moments. Had Sarah not been struggling, had her pockets been full and her mind free of worry, she might have rushed past the old man in the doorway, another hurried figure lost in the festive chaos. Her moment of perceived lack was precisely what opened her heart to another's. It was the vulnerability of her own situation that allowed her to truly see Arthur's. She learned that destiny doesn't always announce itself with a trumpet's call. Sometimes it whispers in the innocent question of a child, guiding us toward the very people who hold the missing pieces of our own story, waiting to make us whole. The following Christmas Eve, The scene was not one of solitude, but of joyful collaboration. Arthur's kitchen was warm and bright, dusted with a fine layer of flour and filled with 3 generations of laughter. Arthur, his hands steady and sure, showed Leo how to knead the dough, his movements a graceful dance of memory and love. Sarah, her apron matching theirs, carefully lined the baking pans, her smile radiant. They were no longer just baking bread. They were continuing a legacy, transforming Mary's quiet act of remembrance into a vibrant symphony of hope. Later that evening, they stood together on the same street corner, not as a lonely old man and a struggling mother, but as a family, offering warm loaves and even warmer smiles to passers-by, each sale a testament to a love that had multiplied by being shared. This is the quiet truth at the heart of their story. The most valuable currency we possess is not the money in our pockets, but the empathy in our hearts. A single act of kindness, born from a moment of genuine connection, can send ripples of grace into the world in ways we can never predict. It can heal a wound, answer a prayer, and forge a bond stronger than any hardship. It proves that the greatest gifts are never found wrapped in shiny paper beneath a tree. They are found in the moments we choose to stop, to see the humanity in a stranger, and to offer a piece of our own warmth against the cold. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you of the power of a simple, compassionate choice, consider sharing it, and perhaps its light can reach someone who needs it most. As the evening drew to a close, they returned to the cozy apartment, the last of the bread having found its way into grateful hands. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, blanketing the city in a pristine silence. Leo, sleepy and content, sat on Arthur's lap by the window, the small wooden robin held gently in his hands as they watched the flakes dance in the glow of the streetlights. Sarah sat beside them, a cup of hot cocoa warming her hands, her gaze resting on the 2 most important people in her world. In the soft light of the Christmas tree, she saw not the ghosts of a past sorrow, but the beautiful, bright promise of a future filled with love. A gentle peace settled over them, a silent understanding that they were, finally and truly, home.